Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here, we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran, expertly fingerpicking a 1930 Gibson Granada 5-string banjo, or else a scrappy upstart, bashing away at a 2019 Deering with a Jim Dunlop guitar pick, this is your show. Because ultimately, it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the second Friday of January 2022, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Marcel who drove a Jeep Patriot with a neon green color scheme and who was really into unprescribed Xanax and recreational paintball. And old Marcel would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now. You guys, that's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. One of those nice things is Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in. Hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, tools to sell your music and merch commission-free. Listeners to the Working Songwriter podcast can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Use the promo code TWS, the initials of our show, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming weeks, the first Sunday night of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern, I'm over on my YouTube channel for Sunday Songs. That's a live stream. I'm live. I'm playing tunes. I'm taking questions in the live chat. I'm taking requests in the live chat. It's a really fun, really interactive experience. I dare to say that we're building something of a community over there on Sunday nights, including many people who are listeners to this podcast. So come on over and be a part of it. That's the first Sunday night of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. Head on over to YouTube and search for Joe Pug, or go to joepugmusic.com and click on the live stream tab. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. First, you could become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon. You search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name. And then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription, a subscription that you certainly don't have to pay for, but that you choose to pay for because you dig the show and because you won't miss a few bucks at the end of the month. If just 1% of our listenership would kick in the price of a cup of coffee every month, it would make an immense difference. So thank you to everybody who's taken the time, energy, and money to go over and do that. I really appreciate you. And if you're not in a place where you can contribute to the show in that way, I totally understand. There's still a couple of ways that you could help out the show for free. First, you could head on over to iTunes, the iTunes store, and leave us a rating or a review there. Or second, you could simply tell a friend about the show. Spread the word about the show. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. Okay, I'll end all the harassment there. This is a great chat. I really hope you dig this conversation I had with Mr. Del McCoury. Our guest this week is perhaps the standard bearer for a uniquely American art form, bluegrass music. Del McCoury originally hails from York, Pennsylvania, and got his start playing in string bands in the taverns of Baltimore in the late 1950s. From there, he pulled a stint in Bill Monroe's band. Monroe is widely regarded as the father of bluegrass, and Del McCoury was able to learn by his side. After taking some time to raise a family, he returned to music full-time in the 1980s with a band that was composed mainly of his own children. He's appeared on Late Night with Conan O'Brien and The Late Show with David Letterman. In 2010, he received a National Heritage Fellowship Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Endowment for the Arts. In 2011, he was elected into the International Bluegrass Hall of Fame. His annual jamboree in Cumberland, Maryland, known as Delfest, is a staple on the robust Bluegrass Festival circuit. Rolling Stone calls him a string music pioneer. NPR calls him a bluegrass legend. It was a true honor to have Mr. McCoury on the podcast. He's a part of American music history, and as you'll hear, he was a delight to talk to. I got a chance to speak with him on the phone a few weeks ago and hear about his journey so far. Mr. Del McCoury, thanks so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter podcast. You once said that while most kids your age got bit by the Elvis Presley bug, you basically got bit by the bug of Earl Scruggs banjo. So how did you first hear the music that would become your life's work, and why do you think it grabbed you in a way that mainstream music did not?
Well, I tell you what, I think for one thing, a kid, I think, has to be a certain age before music really sinks in. I mean, something clicks on up in your brain and you think, oh man, I like this, whatever it is. But anyway, in my high school years, that's when I was starting to play music really well. I guess I started playing banjo then when I was about 11, from what I remember. But then, and I guess at that time Elvis hadn't hit yet, or none of those rockabilly guys. But in high school, all the kids, they were listening to Elvis Presley and Jerry Lee Lewis, and the guy with blue suede shoes guy and all those. But I'd heard Earl Scruggs now. I'd heard him, and I think there was a record released in 1950. My older brother, he played music, and he was 9 years older than me. But he had a day job. We lived on a farm, and he had a day job, and he could buy records, And of course, they were still 78 RPM records. They hadn't switched over to 45 RPM or the vinyl or anything like that yet. So he'd go out every weekend and buy a couple records, and because he's making money, he bought a Flat Scruggs record, and it was Roll In My Sweet Baby's Arms, and it was, I found out later, it was pretty soon after they started their own band. They had been working for Bill Monroe, and they both quit. They didn't quit together. They didn't plan to start a band, but it just so happened that they quit Bill Monroe along about the same time. There was only a little time between the two of them quitting, and then, but later on they thought, well, we was a big part of that band, I guess is what they thought, because they started playing dates and this and that. But anyway, this was probably their on their first record, or one of their first records they ever recorded. That. And Earl Scruggs, he'd perfected that forward roll by this time, and man, he was playing good, I'm telling you. And I thought, when I heard that, I thought, man, that's what I want. I got to do that. My brother had already taught me to play guitar, taught me the chords and all like that, because he wants somebody to play with him sometimes, and so I learned the chords on the guitar. But then it never impressed me that much until I heard Earl Scruggs play the banjo, and I thought, God, this is something. I'm telling you, I'm going to have to learn to do this, but I didn't have nothing to play, you know.
Well, right. So if a kid these days gets inspired by, let's say, one of your records and he likes the banjo on that, all he has to do is get his hands on a banjo, but then just turn on YouTube and there's about 3,000 tutorials of how to play any song on the banjo. How did you go from listening to those records, getting the banjo in your hand, and then figuring out how to play it? I mean, it doesn't seem like a very straightforward proposition.
It sure wasn't, Joe. I thought, I wonder how he does this, you know. And somebody said, you know, that I think he plays with his fingers. He don't play with a pick, you know.
Hmm.
Of course, I learned to play guitar with a pick, you know.
Yeah.
And but then, you know, there was a guy. I'll tell you what, there was a guy older than me. He took a job around there where we lived, and I found out he was a banjo player from down in Virginia, and I saw him play. I think that's the first guy I saw play a three finger style banjo,
Hmm.
and that and I kind of learned the basics from him, you know, and didn't get to see Earl Scruggs till 1955,
Wow.
and and I went to a country music park up there in PA. It was called Valley View Park, and they would book Grand Ole Opry acts, you know, there at that park. And Flight of Scruggs were booked there, and Earl was just young then. I know they introduced Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs, and they can't. Earl, he ran out to the microphone and started playing his Strain 45 tune real fast, you know.
Hmm.
And that really impressed me too, you know. But anyway, I got to see him pretty well up close, and I was doing something wrong. It's been so long now, I don't know what it was, but when I got to see him up close, I saw exactly what he was doing with those fingers. It was the right hand. Never mind the left hand, you know, it'll just it'll do
Right.
anything you want it to, but that right hand was the secret. and, and and I learned the secret by watching Earl, you know.
I love the idea that you had to go in person to physically see it to figure it out.
Right. That's the way it was in those days. And you know, I think about, like you mentioned, the young guys today, you know, they can, just like me and you are on Zoom here, they can pull up anything on that computer, you know, and
Yes.
see up close what each hand is doing, you know, exactly what it's doing if they're trying to learn an instrument, you know.
Right. But where one door closes, another one opens. So there had to be some advantages for you. I'm trying to think maybe one of those advantages was, well, first of all, it would cull out people who weren't really serious about wanting to do it. Right. And then another one would be with the limited amount of records that you had to listen to. I mean, you probably had to listen to those records over and over and over again, and they really got beat into you, you know?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you know, you'd have to pick a needle up and set it back over, you know, to listen to a certain thing. You know, that's the only way you could do back in those days. And like you say, there wasn't that many records to listen to.
Right.
But boy, you know, just for some reason, the sound of that banjo, you know,
Hmm.
really grabbed me, and I never did lose interest. Now I had cousins, you know, once I started playing and could play pretty good. You know, there were cousins that they wanted me to show them something, you know, on the guitar or what banjo or something,
Hmm.
and well, they'd be interested in that week, and then next week they were interested in ball. They forgot about that music, you know.
Right.
So it
Right.
just didn't, you know, just didn't grab them like it did me, and it's funny, I never did lose interest. I just never did. And the only reason I played was because I enjoyed playing. You know, I never
Hmm.
thought about someday being on a stage playing an instrument or anything like that. I just enjoyed it so much. I wanted to learn to do it. You know.
It makes sense. I remember I was doing a gig once. I think it was in Arkansas, and I don't think you were playing it, but I think your sons and the rest of your band were. And I remember what I remember the most about that. There was this big backstage because it was sort of an indoor festival, and I remember for like 3 hours before the gig, your sons and your band were just in there, and they were just playing music for 3 hours, and then basically someone like pushed them onto the stage, and they continued to play on the stage. Someone pushed them off,
Yeah.
but it really stuck with me. Of like, my God, these fellas, they just you can't just do that unless you love doing it. That would be the only reason to do it that much.
Yeah, you're right. You have to love it to put up with all of the like the travel and the losing sleep and all
Yeah.
those things, and yet you're still enthused enough to just get out and do it every day and night. And I can remember when the festivals came along. You know, I I was around before they happened, and after the bluegrass festivals started up and they scattered all over the country, uh, guys would go there a lot of times and they wouldn't even listen to the band on stage, just stand out in the parking lot and play with other people, you know. And that was another boost for guys that wanted to learn to play. That was 1965 when the first bluegrass festival was, and so it um, it it was a thing that helped a lot of the young musicians. I'll shut this door. Hang on.
Yeah, you're good. Now, when did it when did it become a viable path for you to go forward and play music for a living? You start out, you love playing the banjo. Some
Yeah.
guys teach you some things. You go to a concert and see how it's done. You're listening to records, but that seems like a pretty far jump from there to starting to do it for a living. So, when did that path open up for you?
Well, I'll tell you what. Uh, by the time I got out of high school, I was 1956. Um, there was a guy on the radio up in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. He was on the radio there every Saturday, and he was playing in a band on the radio, and he was a fiddle player and a guitar player and a mandolin player. He can play anything. Anyway, he was a sideman though with this band, and through 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 them talking on the radio, I found out he had a restaurant which wasn't too far from where I lived. He was a restaurant owner and also a musician,
Mm.
and so I went to see him one day, and he said he found out I played music. He said, "Hey, I'm getting ready to quit this band. I want you to play banjo with me in my
Mm.
band." And so I started playing with that guy, and it must have been like 1957, and so we were playing locally, around, and he was from North Carolina. This guy was. His name was Keith Daniels, and the band he named it the Blue Ridge Ramblers. And
Hmm.
anyway, uh, he would book dates. He was just an all around guy. He could book dates, manage a band, play music, run a restaurant, and and so I played for him for a while, and he introduced me to a lot of other musicians, and I got acquainted with a guy in Baltimore. See, I didn't live that far from Baltimore.
Right.
It's about 40 miles, I think. And by that time, they had the interstate built too between the
Hmm.
two cities. So uh, I got acquainted with this guy named Jack Cook, and he had done an apprenticeship with Bill Monroe, down here in Nashville. He'd been with him about 3 years, I think, and moved up to Baltimore and got a band there. And I went in to see him one time, and he needed a banjo player. And so I said, yeah, I'd love to do it. So I took a job with him, and lo and behold, Bill Monroe stopped in there one time, and he was going to New York City, and he stopped in purposely to take Jack Cook with him to New York City
Hmm.
because his guitar player had quit, and he knew Jack knew all of his material. So Jack said, "Well, do you have a banjo player with you?" He said, "No, I don't." He said, "I figured we just go without one." And Jack said, "No, let's take Dale with us. He can do all that stuff." So, so I went with him, and I thought, well, we'll probably get up there, and we played Town Hall in New York City.
Wow. What a
And
first gig, huh?
yeah, so and I've been used to playing local gigs in bars in Baltimore, and
Yeah.
where half the people didn't even pay attention to what you were doing anyway.
Yeah.
So, and I thought, boy, this would be something. We'll get up there and probably rehearse the whole show and all like that. We got up there and tuned up and went out on stage. Didn't play one lick with the guy. But that's just the way it was, with him. and but I could catch on. I knew what key he was going to be in, and I mean, I could read him pretty good, and I sang baritone with him. I was
Hmm.
actually a tenor singer, but I got a job with Jack, and I was his lead singer.
Hmm.
Played banjo and sung lead on courses. I didn't know that many songs, but then with Bill and Jack, I knew baritone, so I always knew parts. For some
Mm.
reason, I could figure out song parts, and so I sang baritone on several numbers and played banjo and this and that. And he offered me a job that night, and and it kind of shocked me. But I thought, I like playing with Jack because Bill Monroe, that's this old guy. He's 52 years old, and I thought that's old. But I knew he was the father of bluegrass music, and he didn't have that title then, but he did later on. And
Right.
anyway, I just didn't accept the job. And he told me, he said, "Look," he paid me that night. He said, if you ever take a notion to come and work for me, I'll leave you my phone number, and if you come to town, you just go to a place called the Clarkston Hotel on 7th Avenue
Mhm.
downtown. It's all tore down now. But anyway, and call me up, and I'll come in and, and whatever. So,
So why didn't you take the job at first?
well, I like playing with Jack. Me and him were more the same age,
Yeah.
and I really enjoyed playing with Jack.
Hmm.
I don't know. I just didn't. I don't know why I didn't want to come down here and play with Bill, but anyway, I didn't. And so this other friend of mine, he said, "Hey, you know what?" He's a musician too. He said,
Hmm.
"There's guys would kill for that job." He said,
Right.
if you if you go down and take that job, I'll drive you down there."
Mm.
And so he did. And I said, "Okay." So I came down, and this is a crazy thing too. I came down, and the way it was, there was another banjo player that was coming to audition to Bill at the same time. I mean, I was in the same hotel as he was, and Bill Monroe came in and got us both. And this hotel was it had a restaurant in it, and right next door to it was the National Life and Accident Insurance Company building, and
Okay.
that's where they had the Friday Night Opry. They didn't have it in the Ryman Auditorium. They
Hmm.
had the Saturday Night Opry in the auditorium, but they had the Friday Night Opry there, and so he took us up in that building, and there was a room up there, and I saw a guitar case when I went in the room, and it was an old brown guitar, Gibson guitar case, and he had us both audition on guitar and banjo. I
Hmm.
didn't know that. I didn't realize that till in the later years. The guy's name is Bill Keith. He's a great banjo player.
Mm.
and
Yeah.
but he auditioned us two ways. He wanted to see because he needed a guitar player yet, and he still needed a banjo player, and he auditioned both of us that way. And he finally decided he wanted me to play guitar and sing. He liked my singing,
Hmm.
and and uh, uh, and I had played guitar, and I guess he realized that. He didn't ask me. He just must have. Just when I played and sang, he must have thought this guy's done this before. So
Right.
he hired me on guitar and lead singing, and Bill Keith on banjo, and that's the way we went for about a year.
Now you mentioned when your buddy Jack was with him, you didn't even call that a job. You called it an apprenticeship. So, what did your apprenticeship look like? From where did you learn from Bill Monroe the most musically?
Well, you know what? I think I learned. I learned. I wondered if I could play timing with him, and I found out that was the easiest part of it all. Was because I could play his timing. I mean, I didn't have a bit of trouble staying in time. A lot of guys drag or speed, you know. Yeah, I
Right.
know you probably noticed that before
Hmm.
with other musicians, you know, but I knew his timing was good, and I had no problem with that. My problem with Bill was learning all the songs that I had to learn all these verses for, you know.
Mm.
I knew a lot of choruses because nobody ever depended on me to sing verses to songs. I was just a part singer, you know.
Yes.
So that was the hardest part, man, learning all those. And I rewrote a lot of them on stage. I know I did. we
Well,
we did it. He told me one time we came in off the road. We came in like on I don't know, like a Friday night or something. He said, "Now tomorrow night on the Opry, I want to sing this song, certain one, and I want you to sing it now. It was a gospel number."
hmm.
Well, I knew he had it on the record, and he had sang the verses, and would switch to tenor on the chorus. See, so at National Life and Accident Insurance Company was a library with all the Opry acts records in there.
Mm.
You could go in and listen to all the Opry people's records. They had them all in there. And I went in, I got Bill Monroe's record out and listened to that gospel song and took a pen and a pencil and piece of paper with me so I could write the words down and learn it, you know. And we got on the Opry then. I thought I knew it, you know. Of course, I could learn a song pretty quick in those days.
Hmm.
And we got on the Opry and I got excited and I got this verse mixed up with that one and the next one mixed up. But I never quit singing. I kept going, you know. And I thought, oh man. So when our portion of the show was over, the curtain came down. It was like a segment that was over with, and they'd bring the curtain down, and the MC would talk about Pepsi or whatever, the
Sure.
Martha White flour or something, you know. And so I thought, oh, I'm going to stick close to the old man because I'm going to take my medicine. I know he's going to really. I didn't know what he was going to say, you know. So
Yeah.
I stuck close to him, and as we was walking back toward the backstage, he said, "You know, Dale, I never heard it sung that way." That's all he said. So he didn't remember the words either, you know.
There's a big lesson in there somewhere.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, there is.
so what did you take from him? So that's sort of, the musical education you get. You basically get, it's your version of graduate school almost there, having to learn all those
Yeah,
tunes. But, he was also very successful in the sense, I mean, here you got a guy that's playing town hall in New York. You got a guy that's playing,
yeah.
the Opry in Nashville. He was obviously, to some degree, pretty savvy on the business side. What did you learn from him on the business side about making a living in music and keeping and running a band?
Well, I tell you what, Bill Monroe, as far as running a band, you know, as far as being and managing a band, he was. Uh, there's one thing I thought about. I think more so after I quit was I remembered guys coming to play with him, and he would ride them. If he thought they were lazy, he would
Hmm.
ride those guys. So he hardly ever fired anybody. He just rode them so hard they'd quit. But you know, I grew up on a farm, and I knew what hard work was. He expects you to get on the stage and just work hard with him, you know.
Hmm.
And if he found out you were lazy, he would ride you till you were gone, you know. And we never had no we never had any words between us at all.
Yeah.
But I accepted him as a boss, and I would have did anything he told me to do. But he never told me anything to do really. But I
Mm.
just kind of learned by his example, you know. As far as he was, well, I tell you what. Even today, I don't have a set list when I go out on stage. You know, we don't have any idea what we're going to do because I do a lot of requests from the audience after I
Hmm.
get the guys introduced, you know, and he was that way. He didn't have a set list, and if he was going to sing a song, you never knew what he was going to sing next and what key he's going to be in.
Mm.
But a lot of times he would he would, and he was not a real good MC either. He didn't have that much to say. I
Right.
know a lot of the people that would interview him. He a lot of times he'd just say, "Yes, ma'am," "No, sir," and all that. That's if they'd ask a question. He
Right.
wouldn't
Right.
explain it, and so they'd have to keep going. But anyway, he'd step up to the microphone at about the time the applause was over, and he'd hit a chord on that mandolin. You had to know where that was just by the sound, where he
Wow.
was at. And so, now a guitar player and a banjo player, they had to have a capo ready.
Right.
And we usually hung it in it. They used to call them a capo is what they called them back then too, or a clamp. And I'd hang mine in my left pocket there, and I
Mhm.
just reach and get it with my left hand, put it on with one hand.
Oh, wow.
And, if it was A or B flat or B or whatever, F, whatever, we had a clamp for certain keys that we were going to be in, and I had to. But I learned that from him. I learned because when he hit that chord, it was not long till you're going to be singing that thing.
Right.
So, but as far as the business part, I don't think he was a really good manager when it came to money,
Hmm.
because he had made a lot of money back in. He told me one time. He said, I had this tent show back in the 40s during the war, and they'd go around and they'd play. And he had a baseball team, so they go around, they play this town, and they play a show then there at that town that night. And they drove up, they put up big tents. I mean, big tents. They haul them in trucks, these tents, and so he would be part of the crew that drove stakes and all like that. Uh, and he was making money back when nobody, especially musicians, weren't making anything. But because he had this tent show, he'd go in a little town and he might charge a quarter to get in a person, and
Right.
so he was always making money, and he always spent money.
Yes.
And when rock and roll hit, it really hurt him, like in the 50s, because he was used to uh, playing shows, making a lot of money, spending a lot of money. And then all of a sudden, it was kind of like this pandemic we had. It just shut down. I mean,
Right.
the opera acts, they were hurting. But uh, I'll just say this: I don't think he was a very good manager with money, as far as money went.
Yeah.
But
Well,
I learned just by his examples, just by being with him and seeing how he talked to the audience and all like that, which he didn't say much, but he really did entertain people.
are you stuck in a rut? Are you tired of listening to that Jimmy Buffett 20th Century Masters CD over and over again and need some new music? Are you sick of making hamburger helper beef stroganoff for dinner every night and you want something new to cook? What you are looking for, my friends, is the Enthusiast Digest. That's my monthly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox the first Sunday morning of every month, bursting with musical recommendations, poetry selections, recipes and cooking techniques for my favorite dishes, and items of general interest culled from the vast cesspool that is the internet. The Enthusiast Digest is free to subscribe to. If you dig the poetry that you hear on this show and the artists that you're hearing from, you'll dig the newsletter because I approach it with the exact same sensibility of curation. Go to joepugmusic.com/newsletter today to sign up for free. That is joepugmusic.com/newsletter. It takes approximately 15 seconds to sign up for a free newsletter that will enrich the first Sunday of your month with a veritable cornucopia of new and delightful recommendations. That's the Enthusiast Digest, the first Sunday of every month. Sign up for free at joepugmusic.com/newsletter. Family has always been elemental to Dell's music. After all, his children play in his band to this day, and there is something beautiful about a father being able to impart a knowledge onto his children that is more than anecdotal, metaphorical, or abstract. In fact, there's something very beautiful about him imparting a physical knowledge, the embodied language of music. That's a gift to his children that is beyond comprehension. And there's a beautiful poem by the poet Kathy Mangan that speaks to that embodied wisdom that a parent can pass down. It's entitled, "Making the Fire, Thinking of My Father." On the scraped morning grate, I arrange newspaper twists, coal chips, kindling sticks in rickety pyramid, then carefully insert chunks of spongy firelighter to which I touch the struck match, waiting for the wing beat of caught flame to flutter as if something at the core sought flight amidst the ribbons of lavender smoke streaming upwards. Next, I tip in white wedges of vine-tendrilled pine, lay on one moss-patched log, and finally, the porous, elemental hearts of coal. I am learning daily how love and necessity combine in fire tending. The forced kneeling, the soothing exhalation stay alive. Sap in the wood sizzles, staining its raw ends, and insects scurry its surface until the fire's components adhere, creating orange crevices and a pulsing warmth. Over slow hours, like memory assuming earthly shape, the log replicates itself in powdery gray grain and whirl before collapsing, with the sighing sound of a last breath, into shard and flake, the feathery ashes floating, floating until taken by the updraft. After your stint with Bill Monroe, you returned to Pennsylvania to work a straight job. And I've noticed with many great artists, there is usually a period of time between their early years and maybe some initial success, and when they really break later on, where they step away for a moment, where they're in the wilderness for a little while. Why did you take that break from music professionally? What did it feel like, and what did you take away from it?
Well, I'll tell you what, Joe. When I didn't get married until I quit Bill.
Mm-hmm.
I quit Bill and I got married and moved to California. I had a job offered out there playing with a band called the Golden State Boys, and they had they had a TV show, and they wanted me to play banjo. I got acquainted with those guys through Bill Monroe when I played the West Coast. So I quit Bill, got married, and moved to California. And my wife, she got homesick. You know, she'd never been away from home, and I knew I had to come back to PA, to York County there, because that's where her parents lived, and we did too. That's where I grew up there my own self. So we moved back there, and then of course we started having a family, and I knew that I had to get a job. You know,
Yeah.
so my first job actually was working for her dad. He had a sawmill, and he cut trees and sawed lumber. And then later on, I got a job with a cousin she had. He didn't do any sawmilling. He just did all cut timber and sold timber. A lot of it was exported to say Japan and Holland, you know. And I did that. I did that work for, I don't know, I guess I'll tell you what, I did it till the kids got through school, till they got through high school.
Wow.
They didn't go to college because my two boys, they become interested in music, and they didn't want to go to college once because they wanted to play in my band, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
That was, and all through those years though, I kept a band because this one man I worked for, I told him, I said, you know, I play music and I might take off. He liked music too. He loved it. And he said, no, it's all right. Whenever you need to take off, you need to just go play wherever you got to go. And then when you get back home, come to work, you know, and all like that. So I did that for years. I
Yeah.
did, recorded records and and played dates. I know, I guess I played that first bluegrass festival in 1966, and I was working in the woods then, you know, at that time. So I was fortunate that I could take off from my job. And now I couldn't do that today because I was younger then. I could afford to lose a little sleep, you know, now and then.
Right.
and and I did that, and all of a sudden we found out we were kind of independent, you know, me and my wife, and that's when we moved down here to Tennessee.
Yeah,
And
you know, that seems like, in retrospect, that seems like a natural move, and it all worked out great. But you know, that was probably a pretty risky move at the time. What made you finally take that leap?
it was risky. It really was. And I'll tell you what we did. We we didn't sell our place up there. We kept that place, and it's still up there. We thought, well, we'll go down there and buy a place because we were, like I said, we'd become independent. You know, we both worked too at most of those years. You know, we either we we were both working. But anyway, we thought, well, we'll come down here and buy a place, and if things don't work out, we just put it up for sale and go back to our old house up there. And so we came down, and we came here at a good time because there was still a lot of TV exposure here in this town, you know, and I knew quite a few people too in town here. In fact, my booking agent was in this town.
Hmm.
And so, and from the time I played with Bill Monroe in '63 till I came back down here in '92, there was a lot of improvements too. You know, the airport, you could fly anywhere from this airport. But when I was down here with Bill, you know, the airport was, there wasn't much to it. You know, there
Right.
wasn't much, there wasn't many people flew. But anyway, uh, so we thought, well, we'll go down there and try it and see what happens. And we come down, and things really worked
Yeah.
in our favor when we got here. You know, we got TV and got a different booking agent too, and uh, everything just started um, blooming. You know,
What did that feel like after taking such a winding path to get there?
but it was a great feeling. You know, to be able to get right back into it like had been in the '60s. You know, and I never really grew tired of the road. You know, a lot of guys do, but
Hmm.
I never did. I mean, I never minded the road. In fact, I had buses up there in PA. I let's see, I had one, two, at least three buses that I had bought and traded and this and that, and you know, traveling all around. When I lived up there, I was playing as far away as California, you know, and busing out there
Yeah.
and back, and it was mainly bluegrass festivals. And so when I got down here, it was a lot of those hard dates in far away places we could fly to them. Even though I had a bus, it got a lot easier, you know, when we came here. And we were more centrally located too. You know, we could do the East Coast and we could do the West Coast.
Yes. Now, very famously, you know, and as you mentioned before, your son's playing your band. What's the best part of working with family?
You know, I think the best part is uh, a lot of times you think alike. You know,
Yeah.
I've had musicians that played with me, and yet they were playing an instrument, but they liked this certain other band. You know,
Right. Right.
even though they were playing my music. You know, where my boys, I found out that they like what I did, and they always have. You know, and I had to push them to get them to start their own band because you know, I got to thinking at a certain age they're dependent on me completely,
Right.
and if anything happens to me, they need to be out there established where they can just take and go with it, you know, and that's why me and my manager and my wife, we got them their own agent and all like that, and got them out to doing some stuff like when I'm not working,
Yes.
and and they still do that. They're busier than I am actually. They just come back from Colorado. They played a couple days out there, I think.
Yeah,
And
I've seen them in a lot of different contexts. Like I mentioned, I saw them in Arkansas once, I think, without you, and then I saw them on that tour that they did backing up Dirk Bentley. I guess they've done a couple of those, but I saw them
yeah,
on that tour too, and it was just it was great.
yeah, yeah, and they that way they knew they had to get their own material and all those things, and that gave them a chance to learn about a band, and what you got to do to keep. You got to record records to support your road shows and all like that, and it's just, you know, so they learned a lot about it, man, and like I said, they're busy.
Well, and speaking of material, there over the years, there's a couple of different ways to acquire that. Obviously, you can write your own, and you have, but you're also a very famous interpreter of great songs, a great finder of songs. What has been your process over the years for bringing in that new material and choosing new songs to put on albums or to bring into the set to keep things vital and new for you and the band?
Yeah, well, I never, I even till today, I don't consider myself a songwriter. I tell you what, I think of a songwriter, a guy gets up every morning and thinks, "Oh, I got a song."
Yeah.
He writes it down. I know a lot of guys that are that way, and I just writing a song to me was always a hard job.
Mhm.
I considered it hard, but when I would do a record, I'm thinking, I've got these songs, but I need something new, and so I just have to sit down and write something. No two ways about it. I was kind of forced into writing songs, and but when I get it done, I felt it was a feeling of accomplishment,
Yes.
even though it was hard to do, and I just dread starting one. I'll put it that way.
Yes.
I
Yes.
might have a line or two that I think that's make a good song, but I dread starting that business, because you write the first verse and of course that's easy. Then
Yes.
you got to have another one, at least one more, and if the third verse is crucial, man, I mean tell you.
Yeah.
So, but when I first recorded, I did have a song that I had written. It was Dreams on my first record. I put that on there,
Mhm.
and I would always put one or two that I'd written, on every record I did. But I was fortunate that people would bring me songs too, and of course a lot of them in the early days I would record them, and I didn't think that much about the song, but I knew I needed material, so I would record them. And I
What
these now late in later years now I'll listen to a song and uh, I'll just cull it right away. Uh,
yes.
but I if I if I listen to a demo in the first verse and chorus, I know if I'm going to like that song or not. Good enough to record it. And
Mhm.
of course, this town has got some of the greatest songwriters there is, these days, and I'm fortunate that they send me material.
Nashville's a pretty incredible town. It really is. I know what you mean though about it's so hard to start writing a song. I feel like every time it's time for me to go write a song, it's the first time I start thinking about all the things my wife has asked me to do over the last couple months that I haven't done. And I'm
Yeah,
like, oh, I go scrape some paint right now on that back door. Actually,
yeah,
it's got to get done now.
yeah. No, you're thinking of other things you're supposed to
Anything, anything. Um, Now, I just want to close with you are the standard bearer now of a very important, uniquely American art form. And I just wonder, how conscious are you of that position? Do you look at it as a responsibility, or is it something that you almost have to put out of mind in order to continue to create?
Well, I tell you, Joe, I really don't think about it that way. I mean, I when I think about our style of music, and if I want to listen to something, I'll listen to a Bill Monroe record that maybe had Flat and Scruggs on it, because that's when it all came together right there. And it was amazing that these guys were so talented at what they did, each one of them, and could come together and invent this music. And they were just, I'm sure that at the time they didn't think about it that way, that they were setting a blueprint for something. I know that they knew they were good musicians, because Earl told us that. He said, "Yeah, we knew we were good." He knew that, and it's amazing, because when they started recording, then they couldn't record through the war, but after the war was over, they had to go to Chicago to record at the Wrigley Building up there, and that's where they went and they recorded a whole bunch of stuff they had been playing on the radio, their own shows. And so it was just as if they had practiced up on this material till it was just automatic. They'd go in the studio and put it down just like they did it on the last show they did,
Right.
And where a lot of times today, musicians, they don't know a song maybe till they get in the studio and work it all out and this and that.
Right.
But,
So you're basically saying that you kind of look to that earlier generation as the progenitors and standard bearers, but you can't even, you don't think of yourself in that way?
No, I really don't. I don't, but at the same time, I know that people look up to me, because of the music, and I respect people for that, and
Sure.
But I don't think about it to where it would change me from what I did 30 years ago. I'll still think now I got to record this record because it's time, we got to do this, and you know how that goes.
Yeah.
The whole routine, the bus has got to be ready. I quit running a bus in 2007, and my wife said, "Now look, you're driving too much." See, I love to drive a bus. So
anyway, you were actually driving the bus yourself?
Oh yeah, I drove it all those years until 2007. I'd drive the bus and drive all night, do a show, or all day, half the night, or whatever, and do a show. And she said, "No, now you're going to have to quit that." Well, I parked the bus, and it sat out here till a guy bought it, and he wanted to run it, and it was an Eagle, Silver Eagle, the last one I had. Anyway, then we flew most of the time. We'd rent vehicles, or we'd lease in the bus, and a driver and all like that for all the years from 2007 till last year. And I decided, we don't want to fly that much on account of the pandemic, the way things were. And I said, well, heck, I'll just buy a bus. So I went. This friend of mine, he drove bus for Rascal Flats. All right. That went to nothing too, that went down to nothing. And so he lost that job with them because they quit playing,
Yes.
At that time. And he had a bus of his own because he had a band. This guy didn't. He'd play part-time. And it's a nice bus. It's 45-foot MCI, and it was actually built for a motorhome right from the factory. And it had a big, nice bathroom and all like that. So I bought that bus. Now I'm in the bus business again. But anyway.
Well, I guess that's the pull quote that we can take from this interview. Most people consider Del McCoury to be the standard bearer of bluegrass, but Del McCoury considers himself to be a bus driver.
I know that I am a good bus driver because I drove for Bill Monroe.
Well, there you go.
He never had a bus when I went with him in '63.
Yeah.
And he found out that I drove big pieces of equipment, on the farm and all like that. And he said, Hey, Dale, he called me up one day. I was living downtown here, and he was living out in the country, you know. He
Mhm.
said, I'm going to look at a bus, and I want you to go with me. Well, I went with him, and he went to see, remember Kitty Wells,
Yeah.
the country singer? Her and her husband with Johnny Wright. They had this gym coach that they were getting ready to sell because they bought another one. And so he bought that bus, and I was the first one to drive it. You know, that was in 1963. And that was actually the first bus I ever drove. But I drove trucks and everything before that, you know. And that's why he bought it. He knew that he had a driver in me, and until I quit, and then I don't know what happened to the bus after I quit.
Well, then he was in trouble. Well,
Yeah,
listen, I really want to thank you so much for your time today. It's been a real honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much.
thank you, Joe. Good talking to you.
This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Del McCoury's latest album is entitled Del McCoury Still Sings Bluegrass, available everywhere music is sold or streamed. If before we meet again you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.